During his State of the Nation address in Parliament on Thursday, President Cyril Ramaphosa made a shock announcement that the country's energy crisis would be declared a national state of disaster. Added to this, a Minister of Electricity in the presidency would be appointed to specifically deal with the power crisis. The President said the Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister, Dr Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, has already gazetted the declaration, which aims to prevent the possibility of a total blackout. While the Institute of Race Relations has written to the COGTA minister demanding answers on the declaration, saying it's baffling and requires clarification. We speak now to the head of campaigns, Gabriel Crouse. Gabriel, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us on our platform this morning. What sort of lingering questions does your organization still have concerning the state of disaster?
The basic question is, why declare a state of disaster? I think it might be helpful to just go through a little bit of the law, the Disaster Management Act, to then specify the question. One thing that you hear people say sometimes is that, this is a man-made disaster, this is an ANC-made disaster, whatever, and therefore it can't be a state of disaster. That's not true. The Disaster Management Act clearly says human-caused disasters can also be states of disaster. Another thing you sometimes hear people say is that, look, all of the other options haven't been exhausted within the usual democratic legal framework, and you can't declare a state of disaster until you've exhausted all of those other options. And I certainly think that that makes sense. It would be nice if things were like that. But the Disaster Management Act in Section 27(1)(b) specifically says that you can go ahead and declare a state of disaster not if all the other legal options have been exhausted, but simply if there are, quote, special circumstances, end quote. And Dlamini-Zuma's government gazette of the state of disaster uses that language. It says special circumstances are what warrant the state of disaster. So we're rubbing our chins. We're saying, this is about a future event, a total blackout that hasn't happened. It's a man-made issue. And the reason we need it is because of special circumstances. But what does that mean? I mean, this seems pretty fishy. This seems like exactly what you would do if you were trying to blind parliamentary oversight in order to spend money in shady ways, kickbacks, corruption, basically. And in order to negate that fear or placate it, there needs to be some answers. So we've asked Dlamini-Zuma, could she please clarify what exactly those special circumstances are and what exactly she plans to do using her powers under the Disaster Management Act,
right,
state of disaster, that she couldn't otherwise do in the usual course of affairs.
Well, it appears what has been envisaged in this particular instance is the threat of a total blackout and, of course, the compounding effect of a complete economic collapse as a result of such a blackout. Would that not be a threat enough, a threat that meets the criteria of, special circumstances?
So just to be clear, that is enough, probably, to meet the criteria of the Disaster Management Center, saying that this is a disastrous situation. But that Section 23 of the Disaster Management Act is the center saying, look, this is scary enough. This is enough of a big deal that if you tick some other boxes, you can declare a state of disaster. But it's those other boxes. You need more than that. You need it to be more than just scary in order to declare the state of disaster. And that's the special circumstances. The special circumstances is not the threat. It's something else. And we're trying to figure what that something else is. And just to, put some meat on the bones here, there's two really important sides to this. One is that Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, the COGTA minister, we at the Institute of Race Relations were the first to flag that her premature proclamation of the 2021 national municipal elections was irrational, was legally irrational. There's no ways to understand what she was doing there other than trying to delay the election past its constitutional deadline illegally. And the Constitutional Court found that she acted irrationally. It's a very stringent finding under that disaster situation. She also banned cigarettes, banned liquor. With the cigarettes, there's just no plausible argument at all for how that negates COVID-19. We had the world's longest, harshest lockdown. 1.5 million jobs still not recovered. So we're very worried that the minister might have some idea of what she wants to do. Lockdown to fight load shedding, something like that.
Well, in response to that, Gabriel, the minister has said that, while we're comparing the two different instances of a national state of disaster, what happened in COVID, was more of a limitation of people's rights, and that's why we saw so much court action being brought forward. In this instance, there wouldn't be a limitation of rights. In fact, what they're trying to do is open up resources, get emergency measures in place that would help government deal with the energy crisis. In essence, also take away some of the bureaucracy and the red tape that has been in place in attempts to try and resolve this ongoing crisis. What do you say to that particular response?
So that would be what makes the most sense, right? But here's the problems with that argument. Firstly, Ramaphosa in the presidency has had a special cut the red tape team, which has been saying on paper at least that they've done a tremendously good job of cutting red tape at Eskom. Secondly, the most complicated red tape at Eskom is localization and race-based preferential procurement requirements. The IRR has argued for over a year, has written to Minister Enoch Godongwana of Treasury to say, you've got the powers to cut that red tape under the Preferential Procurement Framework Act, and sometimes that red tape has been cut. It's on public record that Eskom has applied for various exemptions from localization and BEE in procurement, and it has often been granted. So if you want to cut that more, just keep granting it more. Those are options on the table. In terms of budgets, in terms of opening up resources, we're going into budget week, like in a week. So basically, this is the time, more than any other time in the calendar, in the whole year, when it is the easiest through the ordinary course of affairs to redirect resources from, VIP protection for politicians towards what the people really need, which is more maintenance and more output coming from Eskom. You don't need to declare a state of disaster. What a state of disaster does is it takes the usual budgetary process and basically shields Parliament's ability to oversee how the money is being spent, why the money is being spent the way that it's being spent. That's not cutting red tape. That's hiding the spenders from accountability. In terms of the practical go forward here, we think that you should implement Dondo Mokgajane, the former Treasury Director General's advice to sell Medupi and Kusile. That would help boost input. It would help alleviate the debt burden. Boost output. You should implement the Zondo report's advice that localization and BEE considerations really need to come second place. First prize has to go to maximizing value for money. IRR polls show that 80% of all South Africans, including 80% of black South Africans, support a merit-based appointment, for example, rather than a very harsh quota system. So, the country's behind it. Most people just want power. Right. The idea of cutting red tape, redirecting resources, that's exactly right. But what the disaster declaration is doing is not facilitating that. You could do that anyway. It's just hiding it from accountability. And that's why we're asking for the special circumstances, because that just doesn't make sense. Looking at the optics of this, Gabriel, do you get the sense that the president has merely, prioritized the politics of this energy crisis and really failed to look at coming up with practical solutions? In your statement to Minister Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, you list your own sort of steps that could be taken up in response to the energy crisis that could deal with the same crisis in a shorter amount of time. So, like I said, looking at the optics, do you think the presidency is merely prioritizing the politics of this particular crisis and not necessarily the practicality of it? I think, unfortunately, as a South African, as a proud South African, I think that is exactly what's happening here. This is politics over practical solutions. I've already said, part of our idea, sell Medupi and Kusile, don't privatize everything, just privatize those two. You can add potentially 5,000, 6,000 megawatts that would end load shedding, at least for a while. That would alleviate, 100 to 200 billion rand in the debt burden, cut the red tape in terms of BEE and localization. But let me say another sense in which I believe that what's happening now in South Africa is political optics over practical solutions. Eskom, through its Just Energy Transition Plan, under the direction of the presidency, if you dig deep into the proposals that they've committed themselves to, they want to cut carbon emissions at Eskom by 2030 in half, which basically means decommissioning half of the base load being served into the grid. The good thing that President Ramaphosa did theoretically is alleviate. Firstly, the government generally has allowed Cape Town to buy electricity from private producers. The red tape on the ceiling at which you're allowed to produce your own electricity is further being lifted and taken away. But here's the problem. All of that extra capacity that's being added by people personally investing on solar panels on their rooftops and businesses buying big Jennies and then feeding back into the grid is not going to come nearly close enough to getting us off load shedding. We're basically sitting on a plan that shifts us from coal-based load shedding to solar-based load shedding. That's pure optics. That's not addressing the basic need. What does South Africa basically need? It needs a massive increase in electricity from all kinds of sources,
right,
so that businesses can invest, so that jobs can grow. The Institute of Race Relations identifies every poll we've done. Unemployment is the biggest problem in this country, and this Eskom crisis is right in the way of growing the number of jobs in South Africa.
Right. Well, Gabriel, thank you so much. We are going to have to leave it there. That's Head of Campaigns from the Institute of Race Relations, Gabriel Crouse, unpacking their questions being demanded of COGTA Minister Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma with regards to the state of disaster declared in response to the country's energy crisis.